Good morning, Ambassador Schreiner Burgener. It's a great pleasure for me to see you again after quite some time, I must say. We share a common experience. In fact, not only we were together ambassadors in Myanmar back from 2009, but I think we arrived the same day and we presented credentials on the same day.
That's right.
In Bangkok. So we worked together, and it was very good and interesting, and always useful to work with you when you were there. We enjoyed excellent cooperation, and now, after having been ambassador to Germany, you now entrusted the very interesting but difficult task of being the special envoy or the Secretary General of the United Nations on Myanmar. You started this job back in, I think, April 2018, and I think the main task of this was, of course, the Rohingya crisis. But after that, much more meat has been put on the fire, and after elections, we know what happened. Now, I'm very thankful to you for being available for this interview, or rather conversation, maybe we can call it. As I have told you, I am the vice president of an association we founded with the former Prime Minister of Italy, Enrico Letta, to promote relations with the ASEAN countries individually and as a whole. So, of course, we are very concerned with everything that goes on in the area, and unfortunately, now in Myanmar is going through a very severe crisis. As a matter of fact, from the 1st of February, the world is watching as what is going on there with growing concern and consternation. We have reports about maybe almost 300 people killed already. Every day we have manifestations in the rallies in the streets, and none of the two sides seems to be inclined to relent its determination. Some news report even talk about oncoming civil war, menacing civil war in the country. Now, the UN, we know, of course, that you have been trying to enter Myanmar already since the beginning of the crisis, but you were not yet allowed in. But of course, the United Nations are present on the ground all over the country, because all the agencies work on the territory, on the field in Myanmar, and so you might have some first-hand information better than anybody else. Now, my first question, therefore, is what can you tell you about your perception of the situation on the ground? Do you think that this is going to continue, that the rallies and the resolve of the population will carry on? And do you think, in particular, how is this affecting the population?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's also very nice to see you again. And I remember the very fruitful cooperation we had in Thailand. And yeah, now I'm almost 3 years in my mandate, and it was always difficult because the democratization process is difficult in Myanmar, because we had always the army in the government, and that made it so difficult to advance the situation. And now we had on the 1st of February, the coup started, and I always say started, and because as long as the people are on the street and don't want to accept this, then the coup is not finished yet. And that's the reason the momentum is very important now, not to get the army, the so-called Tamado, to a business as usual. And if this moment comes, then it's much more difficult to reverse the situation. So clearly we want to see the situation reversing. that we have the government elected from last November back in place, and that the Tamado, the army, has to renounce of the power. But clearly this is difficult because they are very determined to stay in power. I'm in contact also with the army, and they told me they want to implement a 5-step roadmap. And at the end of this roadmap, they would like to have new election. And in the meantime, clearly the strategy is very obvious. They want to arrest as many as possible who are related to the NLD government. And they want to prove election fraud, corruption. And at the end, I see that they will ban the party of Aung San Suu Kyi. And if they want to do new election, then clearly without NLD. And then they will win with the USTP, who is a party who is backing the army. And then they can stay in power. And we will have another military dictatorship under an umbrella of so-called democratic election, which were not democratic because it's based on violence. And clearly it's against all the laws we can see, and especially now the violence is heavy on the street. But I clearly also, I'm afraid that the situation can even more deteriorate if the people will use the support of the ethnic armed organizations and use also weapons. Then we will have a situation of a civil war, which we really have to avoid. Another possibility is just that it's going on like this, that people are on the street, don't work, that the banking system is breaking down. Already now it's very difficult for the people to get money from the ATM. It's also difficult to get on the work, to buy food. Food, it's maybe still okay, but if it continues, then we have a really chaotic situation on the ground and a failed state with a humanitarian crisis. The situation is very, very difficult to clearly to convince the Tamado, the army, to revert the situation. I don't think that they will do it by their own, that we can tell them that just give up. So I think it must be a pressure, and the pressure clearly comes also by sanctions. And we should not do the same mistake as we did it in the past with sanctions, which hurt also the population. So we should have targeted sanctions against the army. And personally, I welcomed the decision of the United States to have not only 11 people from the army on the sanction list, but also the consortium which calls MEHL and MEC. They have a big business with mines, with hotels, with many things, and so we should cut this line, that they don't have the resources anymore to buy weapons, to pay the soldiers, to have good fortune and so on. But to have this effect, it probably takes time until the army realizes that they have no resource anymore and that they are completely isolated. And I think this is the difference from 2011, that the whole world is not in favor of this coup, and even not China and Russia, because that was for me the first time. I have normally to brief the Security Council at the UN in New York about 3 times per year. Now I had to give a briefing twice in 1 month. And I was surprised that they had at the first meeting after the coup, already a statement, and at the second meeting they had a presidential statement which was accepted by China and Russia. And in this presidential statement, they made the concerns of the situation, but also they asked and demanded for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and the president. So for China as a neighboring country, it's clearly they don't like to see this situation because it's chaotic, it's dangerous that they have more bloodshed, that they have could be a civil war. Then it's really hurting the stability of not only Myanmar, but also the region. And we are still in a pandemic situation where people who are fleeing the country would flee uncontrolled, and therefore will cross the border without corona tests, clearly. And this is this is very, very dangerous for the region. And therefore, China has an interest and must have an interest to find a solution. And that's the reason also China would like to see me in Myanmar to talk to the Tamado and to find a peaceful solution. And that's the reason I go now to the region, first now to Bangkok, and hopefully then I can maybe go to Myanmar. The army didn't say that I'm not allowed to come, but they said you cannot come yet. So I asked, what does it mean, not yet? And they said they have to fulfill first 2 points before I can come. The first is to continue investigations against the electoral fraud, but that will take time in my view. They arrested so many people, and even a foreigner who was the economic advisor of Aung San Suu Kyi, an Australian one. So they want to continue those investigations. The second point, he said, it's to stop the disobedience movement, the CDM. But this will also take time or even never, because the people are very, very determined not to stop the disobedience movement. They don't go back to the work. They were arrested. People contacting me every day from Myanmar. Sometimes I receive 2,000 messages per day. People who are telling me, we will not give up. We were 50 years under the dictatorship. We want to go back in such a situation. And clearly the Generation Z, which means the people who were born between 1995 and 2010, those people, they had now 10 years of more freedom, and now 5 years of a democratic elected government, and they don't want to get back. And we have a different situation than in 1988 with the Saffron Revolution, because now everybody has an iPhone, they are well connected, and clearly the army cuts the internet connection every day in the night, and sometimes also during the day. But people can be controlled better if the army has connections. So I think it's not in the interest of the army to cut the internet completely. So therefore, the people are very well organized, and they also had now a committee called CRPH, which is composed by the elected parliamentarians from the NLD. And with them, I'm also every day in contact.
Right. Ambassador Schreiner, you mentioned several issues that are, I think, particularly interesting, and I will maybe ask you to, before we move on the role of the international community, but just a couple of questions about what is going on in Myanmar. And what I think is interesting is do you think that, particularly on the in the light of what you said about the generals wanting to stop the disobedience movement first before allowing you into the country, do you think there is a risk of protest fatigue? Because of course, upholding for a long period this kind of protests is very difficult. Not only they are countered by the military in violent ways, people are killed, but then I mean, the ordinary life doesn't go ahead anymore, and then people need to work in order to earn their life. We have seen in neighboring Thailand, where there has been last year this movement that appeared to gain momentum, but that then at a certain moment it all sort of died away, and it seems difficult to start. It was really looking some signs of getting to where they wanted, but then without being crushed in the same way as the Tatmadaw I do in Myanmar, it sort of faded away with the Christmas holidays and New Year, what you have, and that's a different thing, of course. But protest fatigue is something that can happen. On the other hand, as you said, there are signs that there could be a sort of union of interests between the disobedient movement and the ethnic groups. One tends to forget that Myanmar is very much a federation. It's a federation of people that speak different languages, that historically have been controlling their own territories, that for many decades have been fighting the central government. And on the other hand, of course, the National League for Democracy is a very much Bama movement, a movement which has its roots in the Bama majority. This was one of the reasons why, of course, Daw Aung Suu Kyi has been accused about not stopping the Rohingya persecution. So the questions are these: do you think there could be a protest fatigue on the one hand, or there could be a stronger linkage between the movement, the disobedient movements, and the ethnic groups? Because of course these two things could lead in very different directions.
Yes, yeah, that's right. There is really maybe to say one positive effect of this coup is that people coming closer together, because in the past they were the ethnic minorities, and also especially the Rohingyas, who were the victims and who were neglected from the government as well. And we know that the NLD government also had difficulties to bring in the democratization process the ethnic armed organizations and the 135 ethnic groups. And the Rohingyas were always discriminated in the past. And now that the army acting against their own people, their own ethnicity, the Bama, which are the majority of the country. And now the Bama people telling me, we understand now the grievances of the Rohingyas. It must be terrible for them what they went through. And many people didn't believe what happened in 2017, but now they realize that there are infantry regiments who are very, very cruel and using a lot of violence, and also security personnel using a huge scale of violence. And if I see those video clips, then it's really horrible. I think they are under drugs, because normal human beings cannot act in such a manner. And now the people see this violence affecting their daily life. And so therefore they have now also sympathy for the ethnic groups. And in the beginning of the coup, this group of the elected NLD parliamentarians contacted me, that's the CRPH, and they asked me also for advice. And I said, listen, don't do the same mistake as it in the past. Please connect to the ethnic armed organizations, talk to them, make it together a democratic process. So they did it, and now we had a statement from the two national ceasefire agreement groups. They are 10 ethnic armed organizations. They made together a statement that they're against the coup and that they will not allow violence against the civilians, especially not in their own region. That means they can really expect support from the EAOs, and that makes them much stronger. And that's good that they are together, and maybe they also realize now that many years we had even Buddhist groups who were very nationalist and racist, and we know that this came from one monk, Viratu, who made a lot of racist speeches, and this was probably used also by the army to have scapegoats in their own country, and that's quite normal in a dictatorship. You need scapegoats to have the a little bit of acceptance in the population. But this is now not the case anymore, and this, I think, could be a chance for the country.
Well, that's very interesting, and that would be a major change on the scene in Myanmar. Well, I think that we can move now on the role of the international community. You already dwelled on the Security Council, the somewhat unexpected behavior of China that went on with the statement of the President of the Security Council, which is a good thing. And then, of course, you mentioned ASEAN. What I think is particularly interesting in this conjuncture is, I think it's most remarkable, the position of ASEAN. Of course, Myanmar was admitted in '97 to ASEAN. That was probably earlier than the international community would have liked them to be admitted, but they took this important step to maybe in thinking that this could have helped democratization in the country, which eventually happened. But the role of ASEAN, of course, is increased very much in recent years. Their influence in the world is certainly different from what it was 20 years ago. They are now seen as like in a position between China and the US, in the middle of geopolitical games, but they have a very strong position themselves. Their typical political attitude towards the members has traditionally been that of non-interference. It has even acquired a name. It has been called the ASEAN Way, being a way of not going into the limelight, not taking things in public, but discreetly discussing them and trying to bring them towards a solution. And it has worked in several cases. Now, more recently, of course, the Rohingya crisis has brought upon a rather different approach by the ASEAN country, and in particular by Indonesia and Malaysia, being both of them very large Muslim countries, and therefore very sensitive towards, very sensible towards the troubles of the Rohingya people. Now, we have seen a lot of diplomatic activity on the side of the ASEAN, countries. And particularly recently, the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Singapore has visited first the president, the Sultan of Brunei. They hold the presidency, of course, as ASEAN, and then he's seen his counterpart in Indonesia. There has been a special ministerial meeting on Myanmar at the beginning of March. More recently, the latest news are that President Joko Widodo has called for a special summit on the situation. So this is really the ASEAN going out of his traditional way. And to me, it brings a little light of hope to the whole situation. Now, I would like you to develop on this, to comment on this, and tell me how you can sort of integrate ASEAN in the effort of ASEAN into the efforts of the UN, the international community. Of course, ASEAN are also have a difficult role to play with regards to the displaced people, because people are fleeing Myanmar towards the border of Thailand and Malaysia, that you can reach through the ocean, of course. Mm-hmm. So, please.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. The ASEAN, they really can play a bigger role than in the past. And I already worked with ASEAN in the last 3 years on the Rohingya issue, because the Myanmar NLD government was not so in favor of the UN working in Rakhine. And when I said, you know, when the Rohingyas are coming back, almost 1 million refugees from Cox's Bazar back to Rakhine, then we should observe the situation on the ground, how they are treated, and that the discrimination is not going on again, and that we don't have another refugee situation. Then the government told me we don't like to have observation on the ground, and then I said, and then they said, especially not from the UN, not from Western countries, and then I said, why not the ASEAN? This is your family. And then they said, yeah, why not? The ASEAN can be present on the ground. And that was the reason that I went 2 years ago to Jakarta to meet the Secretary General of ASEAN and to talk also to ASEAN governments. So I made a whole tour around the ASEAN countries, and they were all in favor to help and support the Myanmar government. And then the AHA Center from the ASEAN, I visited them, and they said they could be on the ground in Rakhine when people are coming back to give them support. And also now they have a connection person from ASEAN who should be in Naypyidaw for this reason. That's the reason they were already very much involved in my work as well. And when we had the coup, clearly I was in continued contact with ASEAN government, and especially with the Foreign Minister Retno from Indonesia. She pushed the idea of a summit, ASEAN summit, together with the Secretary General of the UN and together with me. And now she proposed this to Brunei, and the Foreign Minister of Singapore seems also very keen for this idea. I'm also in contact with him, and he went now to Brunei, yesterday to Indonesia, and they want to convince also the countries who are more in the old fashion of non-interference of ASEAN country in other issues of other countries, neighboring countries, so on. And that's clearly more the countries like Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, but also Thailand is in a very in a situation as the neighboring country, but also had this experience of a military coup. Clearly The Prime Minister knows Min Aung Hlaing, the Commander-in-Chief of Myanmar, but they also must have an interest of a stability in the region, especially during the corona pandemic. And therefore, I'm hopeful that this summit will come true and that we can maybe also at this summit conclude that we should maybe go together to Myanmar to talk to the army. So this is now in evolution, and I hope that we can continue this very promising cooperation.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, that brings some a little hope on the whole situation, and we wish you well with this. Now, I think we can move to the last part of our conversation, which relates to a subject you briefly touched upon, which is sanctions. And of course, we know that there are several theories about sanctions. Some people are more in favor, but I think everybody agrees that blanket sanctions are certainly to be avoided, that should be earmarked sanctions, and what happened up to now is certainly going into that direction. On the other hand, the moment I read an interesting article saying that the moment you impose some sanctions on large conglomerates, they provide electricity, power. The moment you impose sanctions to them, they won't be able to produce the power needed by the people, and people risk finding themselves without power at home. The moment there are many ways in which, although not being directly earmarked to, not blankets, but being earmarked to the generals or to those who are involved in the coup, they might affect the general population. So this could be, in a way, bearable in the short term, but if they do not reach any solution, then of course probably the international community will have to think again, think twice, think better, because eventually those who are going to suffer are the general population. So what do you think about that? Then I will tell you one last thing that you can comment together. We, as an organization, of course, we promote relations between the member countries of ASEAN and Italy, which means mainly in the economic field. Now, what do we do now? Do we promote relations with Myanmar? It comes to an ethic sort of questions. Should this country be sort of put in a limbo where they are sort of blacklisted, you don't do any business with them, or at least you avoid promoting relations with them because they are under such a situation? But by doing that, you are sure this is going to affect the general population. So we are sort of in a conundrum. What would be your views on this?
Yeah, I agree with your point that general sanctions are normally hitting the people on the ground who are already in a poor situation. So that should be avoided. But targeted sanctions are, in my view, very helpful because we know that the people on the higher rank in the army, they have a lot of money from business in copper mines, in hotel business, in very various sectors. And the conglomerates of MEHL and MEC, the most money goes to the army. And also, which we should also think about is all the gas revenues, like from companies of Chevron and Total, the money goes normally to the government, which is now the army. So this could be a measure that those revenues would go in a fund and not directly to the Tamado, and maybe later then back to the government which was elected legally. So such ideas, I think, should be discussed from the member states. Clearly, we from the UN, we don't give any advice on sanctions, but I have to brief regularly the Security Council and the General Assembly of the UN. And personally, I would like to see very strong measures coming from the communities together. So a Security Council resolution would be, in my view, very welcomed, but it must be targeted. And we saw in other countries already that maybe if they lifted the everything but arms scheme, then it hit normally especially the women on the ground who are working in the garment sector, and they lost money and they lost jobs, and this should be avoided. But if I speak to the Burmese people now, then clearly they tell me every day, don't support the Tamado, don't support the army, and isolate them and take big measures. They already also talk about the R2P, the responsibility to protect mechanism, which is probably not possible because then we need a Security Council resolution. And for China and Russia, this will probably not acceptable. But clearly, I think we have to isolate more and more the Tamado, that they realize this is a no-go. Because if we get to a business as usual, then it's almost too late to bring the government back. And clearly investments are needed in such a poor country, and Myanmar was already before the coup, and even in the development process and in the democratization, still a very poor country. If we see that almost 60% of the people are not connected to electricity, and as I moved before the corona pandemic, moved around Myanmar, I was normally 8 times per year in Myanmar and spent 2 to 3 weeks normally. And when I moved around, I could see how difficult it is for the people even to have a health service. So if you are in the countryside, you need sometimes 8 hours to drive to the next hospital. And then maybe for a minority people was not even affordable to go to the hospital, or in Rakhine they have to pay bribe to get in to the hospital to have the services. So this has clearly to be changed by the policy, but for that they need also development. And if the country is developed, it's one of the most or the less connected countries. So the connections, the infrastructure are so poor in the country, and therefore I would like to see more investments in Myanmar, but for the people, and clearly not investing in projects which is in favor of the investing country. And that was also probably a reason why the democratic elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi can assess much better the need of the people on the ground, because then they care about the human rights and also the protection of the environment. But in a dictatorship, normally they don't care about those rights. And that can be that a military dictatorship can be more favorable for projects coming from outside, because then they are implemented much faster. But it's not sustainable in my view, because it's not with the will of the people on the ground. And therefore, I would like to see the democratic government back, and that then we have investments from the other countries who are in accordance with the rights of the people on the ground. So I would say yes, invest, but not towards the dictators.
Yeah, no, no, I certainly very much see your point. I think that we must sort of concentrate our efforts in promoting issues, but discussion as well, and knowledge, because that awareness, because that's very important, but also in trying to promote more activities from the Italian side that will go directly towards the benefiting the population, rather than you were talking about infrastructure project that of course would need to go through government, and then would obviously benefit more at this point the military, rather than those who hold power, rather than the people. I think Ambassador Schrader, that you gave us a lot of your time. We're very thankful to you for this. You know, you're very busy. I think you told us a lot of interesting things, and our knowledge and knowledge of those who follow us will be certainly much more increased, and will have a clearer vision of what is going on the ground. And we thank you so much, and we wish you all the very best with your mission. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really need support, and I'm very grateful to Italy. You have also a wonderful senator, the Albertina Soliani. I'm in contact with her. And also the EU ambassador in Yangon is from Italy. So you have very committed people in Myanmar, and I'm looking forward to the cooperation, and thank you for your support and interest.
Thank you so much. And in whatever way we can, as an association, be of help, please keep us in mind. In fact, we were talking earlier on about Mr. Balakrishnan, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Singapore, and the Minister Retno from Indonesia. They were both at the association where they gave speeches. So we do have contacts with them, and we are certainly very much willing to contribute. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Bye-bye, Christine.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All the best.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.